Joining me in the studio is Yael Tamar. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we obviously have a really freakish situation here when we have a lot of money stolen, and this happens again and again. So what is going on? What's causing all this?
So, right, unfortunately, this is not the first time it happens, right? We've seen Bancor hacked just about a month ago, and we've seen other exchanges and cold storage wallets hacked. Now, everybody's telling us, crypto investors and professionals, that the cold storage is, in fact, the best form of storage out there, right? And then we hear this on the news. So what kind of solutions do we have? What kind of solutions do we have left, right?
Just going back to the cold storage, a lot of people will be watching right now thinking, what's cold what? Cold storage. What's cold storage exactly?
Right. So basically, you have several types of hardware storage. For cryptographic keys, you can have like kind of a USB device that you can plug in and store your keys on. There's some that you can download on your computer, but then when you go on the internet, you may have your cryptographic keys compromised. So in the cold storage model, there is never an overlap of internet connection and the cryptographic information on your key. So you kind of go offline to access the information on the storage, to access your funds and to be able to do transactions. So that's why the industry has been telling us that this type of storage is the most efficient storage out there.
So how is it regarding to the storage, how does it link to the actual security?
So basically, because there is no access to outside networks, your cryptographic keys are supposed to be safe, and you're supposed to be able to access your funds and access your storage in a secure way. So a hacker is not supposed to be able to intercept that information and steal the funds. Yet, what we see in the news is completely the opposite, and that's really worrying to an average investor, right? And that's why a lot of people actually stay away from crypto investing. So thankfully, there's some new models out there that may be even more secure than this type of storage. For example, Unbound Tech just announced their new platform for cryptographic keys security that will be able to secure pretty much any type of storage available, but with a different means. So in this case, for cryptographic keys are not going to be stored anywhere. Neither online nor offline nor on hardware. They're basically stored nowhere.
Right, and that sounds really strange because
sounds fiction, yeah. But it's true.
But if there's not storage anywhere, does it make it more secure? Right.
So if you cannot find the cryptographic key on any one location, you cannot steal it. The way it works is there's a methodology called MPC, multi-party computation, and it's been used for the last few years by the leading security companies, where your cryptographic keys are stored on a variety of devices. And there is a mathematical formula behind it that proves that you cannot steal this information. Basically, the thief does not have access to all of the information at once.
Have to go to different places.
Right.
So you basically have keys scattered all over the place, and technically there's nothing to actually physically chase. Please join us later when we talk more about this subject. I'm wondering what was happening, and I think we already covered some of this before, but at the moment we have a lot of assets stolen from different exchanges, and now we're going into a new type of technology, new type of revolution, if you like, when you don't store information in the same place.
Yeah, so that's one of the solutions out there that I think in the future is going to be the prevalent or the leading solution. You know, hackers are getting smarter, and there's always this cycle of increasing security in response to the hacking attempts and successful attempts at that, and vice versa. So, you know, where do we go from here? Do we make secure storage even more secure, or we kind of try to find these out-of-the-box solutions to outsmart them? So that's what the industry is basically doing, and that's why you have this huge security industry in this space.
And when you say out of the box or you find new solutions, what does it actually mean? Is it the tech sector that have to step in and basically say, okay, this is the way we're going to run our crypto and exchanges, or this is the way we're going to fork X or Z? Because TIO is going through a fork and they're going to call it TIO X. But from a public point of view, if I have my assets in TIO, how do I know that X is better than what's just happened?
Right. So obviously you have this huge problem on exchanges, and the public is worried, is their money safe? Well, in this case with Trade.io, actually public money was not stolen. It was a storage that was kind of like a backup for Trade.io that was compromised, and again, the tokens were stolen. So now they have to liquidate them. So that's why Trade.io reached out to a bunch of exchanges, including Bancor and KuCoin, where some of the tokens have already been transferred. About 1.3 million of them have been transferred there, and Bancor and KuCoin are cooperating to figure out where the money is and how to prevent it from being liquidated. So at the end of the day, security is the prevalent feature of crypto. You cannot trade in crypto without security. So obviously the tech giants, security giants, and startups are coming in together to find out-of-the-box solutions for security. And one of them, as I mentioned, is a virtual HSM solution or MPC solution, a multi-party computation to overcome the cryptographic key possible compromises, right?
Sure. And as a solution, you have, as you said, there are several, but are any of these actually going to work?
So it has been tested and in the market as well, and MPC has both mathematical proof and actual proof, and we need to see how it actually plays out when the industry standards are set. So right now the industry standard for this type of security is the cold storage as the highest level, right? So we need to talk about possibly redefining or supplementing the industry standard for exchanges, for trading platforms, for crypto custodians and other stakeholders.
And that's a great point. I think we'll back later to talk about the actual industry standards of the industry in cryptocurrency. And joining me again is Yael Tamar, who's previously talked to us about the securities and way to decentralize security keys. Now, we mentioned briefly that one of the most revolutionary ways right now is to basically rehash the key across different places, so the thief wouldn't have access to the entire key, but different pieces, which will make it a lot more complicated to make the theft. Is that the way to move forward from now on?
I think so. I think we cannot keep outsmarting the hackers by making traditional security methodology even more secure, because the more secure we make it, the better they become at hacking it. So we have to think outside the box. And that's where MPC, multi-party computation methodology, comes in, and it's been mathematically proven to work really well. In fact, some players in the blockchain industry are using the same methodology. For example, an Israeli company called Enigma is using MPC to store private information on public blockchains. Right? You have, in certain situations, you have information that you transfer, different smart contracts that you do with your partners that you do not necessarily want to have available on the public blockchain. So in their case, they use multi-party computation to secure that information and keep it off the public eye.
And how does it actually work? I mean, you said private information on public blockchain. So wouldn't that make private information publicly available?
Exactly. So the way it's stored, as far as I understand, the way it's stored is using the multi-party computation method. So it's stored publicly, but it's stored in different locations, so you do not have all the information at once. So obviously you do not have the exposure for hacking or for security breaches for that information, as well as any sort of a business case in which you want to keep that information private.
In which case would that be? I mean, wouldn't it just be easier to store private keys on private blockchains?
There are different advantages for using private or permission blockchains or public blockchains, and a company will examine those when they start their operation. Actually, this is one of the biggest challenges of blockchain adoption, is that enterprises know very little about blockchain and how to approach it, which blockchains to use for which cases. And I've been talking to different regulated entities like insurance companies and pension companies, that are looking into using private or permission blockchains. But then public blockchains may also have their merits as well. So Enigma kind of bridges between the two worlds.
And I think going forward then, I mean, it becomes so technically advanced. Do you have to be a genius to get into blockchain now?
Actually, the way it's supposed to be to reach mass adoption is for regular people on the street to be using technology without even knowing how it works. If you ask somebody around, if you ask somebody on the street, how does the internet work? Would they be able to then explain about the satellites in space, about the network of computers? Probably not. So that's how I think blockchain is going to become. We're going to be using it without even knowing.
So exactly. So it's all about making it secure enough so that we can roll out mass adoption. And I think we're about to see more of that in the future, and probably very soon we are to see a very secure way for an average person to trade in crypto. Hello and welcome to Blogs Live TV. For panel today, I've got Yael Tamar and Jessica Walker joining me to talk about adoption of blockchain in developing countries. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, we have a lot of ideas going in saying that, there's a lot of opportunity for new people to come in and build something on blockchain, but also for people who are standing outside this to be able to adopt this, particularly in banking or many unbanked countries.
Right.
How would this actually work? If we go back to a continent such as Africa, you have existing ways to send money which are outside of banks, right? How does it work at the moment, and how can blockchain be implemented there? We'll start with you, Yael.
Sure. So in the global economy, which most people don't know, is that about 30% of the world population is currently unbanked or underbanked, which means they either don't have a bank account or they do have a bank account, but they don't have access to advanced services such as loans and financial investment kind of services, which allow people and countries and economies to develop further. So Africa or developing countries are kind of known to leapfrog certain technologies. So we know that in Africa, mobile payments are very much developed, and that comes out of this necessity because there is no good infrastructure for people to use. So because there are over 2 billion people in the world that are unbanked, blockchain is creating enormous opportunities for growth. As you said, Yelena, there are some current existing ways to do, for example, remittance payments from abroad, and it's usually done with some sort of an existing transfer mechanism or mobile payments and as well as cash transfers across the borders. However, these methods are not helping the countries and the economies to grow in a way we see in the developed countries. So the question is how do we facilitate growth in a country where there are no banks or access to financial means for these people to start businesses and to live? And blockchain gives an answer here, because now their traditional services that banks would provide will be available to people at large and to companies that will be able to provide loans and financial services. And these traditionally bank-governed services, such as identity proof, for example, a lot of people in Africa apparently don't have say valid identification that they can provide. Many even don't know their birth dates. So blockchain provides a way for these people to receive identity. That's one. And number two is credit history. If you've never taken credit, you don't have credit history. So blockchain allows you to create credit history, to take information from various databases and then create this credit identity as well. So now you can provide these services that banks traditionally provide throughout other entities that may be supported by the government.
Sure. I guess one of the problems would be that some of these countries have been colonized up into 50s and 60s. And when you have a new system, an alien system coming in from outside, such as blockchain, that's technically intimidating. The initial reaction might be that I don't know anything about this, so why would I use it? Do you think, Jessica, do you think that people are likely to adopt it as easily as they've been adopting a regular phone?
I think mobile payments in Africa and other countries, so Philippines first used mobile payments in 2001, so that's really, really advanced actually. And if we look at how countries are adopting this kind of technology, they're actually ahead of a lot of European countries in a lot of ways. I think when we look at the costs that are linked to mobile payments and mobile payment costs, actually sometimes the fees can be quite high. And when we look at that as something that is implemented daily by people all across the world, if you introduce something which is blockchain technology, which could potentially have very little cost to it, I think people would be very open to at least trying this technology, because you made some fantastic points there. And I think another one, if we look at when there are elections in areas in Africa, the issue of identifying yourself, of the way that everything is manually voted, it means that things can be manipulated in certain ways as well. There's a lot of ways that blockchain technology could be introduced in these regions that could really improve people's standard of life. And land registry, for example, you conducted an interview last week. There was an issue in India which a woman called Jenny from the Blockchain posted on LinkedIn a few days ago, and it was that one man sold one plot of land to over 100 different people in areas of India in cash, and there was no way to track it. So if you had some form of kind of cryptography, some kind of tracking of this, these kind of things could be really prevented and help regular people that are just trying to live a day-to-day life.
I think you raised a really good points that just from the identity point of view, we know that you can implement identity on the blockchain, and using biometrics would allow people to get by those things like, you know, the birth certificate and all the rest of the paperwork that are not necessarily in place.
Exactly, and they've been using this, by the way, for aid. A UN program called Building Blocks has been using blockchain to identify aid recipients and then actually disperse aid in a pilot project. So there have been a lot of initiatives using blockchain for aid because there is such a really good fit there. Right. But governments actually, especially African governments, are very receptive to blockchain, and that's mainly because they see blockchain not only as a way to improve their quality of life, but also as a way to inject capital in the economy. Countries such as Nigeria are trying to develop their local startup ecosystems, and in particular, there is actually a TV show, a reality TV show of blockchain startups trying to make it and raise funding called Street CEOs in Nigeria. So there are cable networks, and you know, everybody's getting excited about blockchain to a point that it's actually penetrating kind of at least the knowledge and the awareness of the people there.
And yeah, it does certainly seems like it is a topic that's uniting many different sectors and many different nationalities around the world. I'm just thinking in terms of the establishment and the way it looks now. We obviously have a lot of corruption, a lot of politicians pushing their agenda, perhaps not wanting to have a biometric ID or blockchain at all because they want to be the one that wins the country. So how do we bypass those problems? If we start with you, Jessica.
I think you've got the answer here now. Would you like to go first with this one?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
So I am a big believer in the good guys. And there are many government officials that I'm aware of, actually, that are trying to implement blockchain for exactly this reason, to get rid of the black market. In some countries, like Argentina, like Pakistan, 80% of transactions are done, you know, underground. So it's not good for the government either. It's not good because the government wants to collect taxes, the government wants to have control, and I personally believe that we're going to see in 10 to 20 years a huge change in the global climate towards transparency, eliminating corruption, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
And if we go back to organisations like the United Nations as well, I think if we have advocates that are really just educating governments as well as just regular people on the kind of technologies and how it can benefit, because these can benefit governments as well, this can benefit whole countries. And I think if it's delivered in a constructive way, actually it has a chance to really make some progressive movements here.
So where would it start, though? Would you have one village, one town possibly doing biometric? We do have some contributors here, blogs that go out to places like Papua New Guinea, and they install boxes that are solar powered. And with these boxes, you can simply get an ID with your biometric data. So you have your fingerprints, then there you go, that's you on the blockchain. Would that be necessarily would that be the start of this sort of blockchain revolution in developing countries?
Absolutely, absolutely. It all starts with a person, right, who has an idea. Always, everywhere, in blockchain as well, or a group of people. So in this case, we need a government official, maybe a mayor of a town or a province that wants to make a difference. And they decide and they push the initiative to get their district, their town on blockchain. And then there are different initiatives and companies and organizations that will help them get on blockchain. It's actually part of the vision of my company, TopOfBlockchain, to help municipalities get on blockchain. And that can be done via somebody coming in with an app on their phone, scanning a QR code, filling in a lot of information that is known as Know Your Customer, KYC at the moment, filling in as much as they can, providing as much information as they can. And thankfully, there are actually agencies set up in many countries that are able to verify that information, third parties that verify personal information. And that would be the beginning of what we know as a decentralized ID. Now, the really cool part about the ID on blockchain is that a person will have control over who to give this information to. So right now, you know, the story about Facebook and other online entities that kind of give away your personal information, as well as, in some cases, breaches, even of government databases. So in this case, we have an ultra-secure database where, again, you have control over which parts of information to give to banks, to insurance companies, to the government, and not your whole package. So you are in control of your ID.
And I think you raised two very good points there. One is that you kind of need a role model, a use case, and we've seen such use case in Switzerland, and we take Zeg, for example, as a town where the mayor is really accepting of blockchain. He kind of hates Bitcoin himself personally, but he's very happy to implement it in his small little town to see how it goes. And if you go there, you can actually pay for everything in Bitcoin, because that's the part that, you know, they decided to adopt. Then secondly, the way we segment data and the way we segment data in terms of privacy, and this also goes on to security technically, that we can rehash and split part of the data, which is something we covered early in the show, in different places. Well, how would that work, though? Like, let's say that I've gone to a bank and I've got a bank account, and I just want them, all the other banks, to only have access to my birthday.
So this is extremely new technology, extremely new methodology, but it's already being implemented. So on blockchain, you have control of your data. And you will see probably some sort of a client app on your phone or on the computer where you give access to whichever entity is requesting, but just a specific access to a portion of your ID. So that's in general, we need to make it work in a way that's accessible to the population at large.
Jessica, would you say that people will be more more open to blockchain if they only had to give away part of the data, and would they know the difference?
I think a lot of people now are very data sensitive. I think in recent years we've seen people actually really almost scared about what data is going out there. I think the idea that you can put out what you would like to, especially if you live in different areas of the world, that data is actually really important to you at different times. The fact that you could put that out there is something which is really recognizable, and I think a lot of people will sit up and listen and say, well, that sounds great. I'm not really sure if I understand the technology, but maybe they'll make more of a conscious effort to do so. Just because of that aspect alone, I think is something which is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I agree.
And going forward then, I mean, is there anything, any institutions or for the tech community that they could possibly do to help developing countries to get into the game? Because let's be honest, the further this goes on, the larger the gap is. And what we don't want is Europe and North America to go ahead with this technology, and if it works, be really comfortable with that, have all the new services, whereas the developing countries are lagging behind even further.
So I wouldn't be surprised for Africa or for developing countries to be actually early adopters of this technology, just because of the need. You know, in the West, we kind of say, okay, well, I have a credit card. Why do I need blockchain to make transactions? So then you kind of need to change these mindsets towards decentralization. In Africa, you have a lot of decentralization already. For example, because of this absence of banks giving out loans to small businesses, there have been platforms that were created, for example, Kiva, which since 2005 has been giving out microloans to businesses. Now, recently, they've actually announced that they're going to be using this identification and credit capability of credit history capability of blockchain to supplement their ability to give out loans. And that's actually, in my mind, the most important feature of blockchain that I think will be implemented in the financial sector in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, is the ability to get to give this credit history, to create a way to see how likely the person is going to be to repay the loans. So that's going to power developing countries for sure. As far as your question about the disparity between the North America and Europe and the developing world, as a believer in blockchain, I think that's going to be actually the tool that's going to help us come together. And governments and technical organizations and companies like mine, I feel like we have a responsibility to actually go out and help the developing world to get these technologies started. Israel, where I come from, has a lot of programs for collaboration and cooperation with Africa, teaching them about the startup ecosystem. You may have known that Israel is number 3 startup ecosystem in the world, with over 4,000 startups, 300 in blockchain right now. So I personally feel that we should go out there and help create the same type of ecosystems everywhere.
And this decentralization certainly puts the right ethos to the right community of decentralizing the knowledge.